Great day. Welcome to the King Connections podcast. I'm your host, King. Today I'm joined by a business attorney as well as a real estate attorney, a gentleman that I was introduced by another connection of mine who is a CFO. And we like to focus on King Connections podcast, the importance of building great relationships and great connections, because the connections that you have in your network can definitely help you grow and become more sustainable, particularly if those connections are in line with your core principles and values. As I was introduced to this gentleman, we were introduced based on the fact that we had several things that we were in alignment on, and that was the reason we connected. And I just want to stress the importance of what's in common and what's in alignment. A lot of people mistakenly focus on building relationships with people they have things in common with, as opposed to alignment. In common is more extrinsic. Like we might like sports. We might be the same age. We may be the same skin color, same ethnicity. Those things we may have in common. But what I like to focus on, which is more intrinsic, which is the principles and purpose you have in life, which you have in alignment, such as what's your purpose for life? What the principles you govern your life by? Those are things I like to connect with people on. And with that being said, I'm definitely believe that I have a lot of things in alignment with today's guest. So without any further ado, please welcome to King Connections podcast. And forgive me if I mispronounce your name, sir. Shmuel Gertel.
I'll say it. It's Shmuel Gertel.
Shmuel
It's one of
Gertel.
those tough names.
Thank you. Well, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, one of the first questions I like to ask is kind of assessing what I call your spiritual energy number. And what I mean by that is a number from 0 to 10. 0 being life sucks, 10 being life is awesome. So where would you say right now you're at this very moment?
I think that I'm always glass half full kind of guy. So even in the lowest of times, I try and at least be at a 5. I never want to be below 5. So I would at least say that I'm at a 5. But I'm always aspiring to reach 6 to 10. At a minimum.
Excellent. Now, the reason I asked that question is because I realized that to me, everything, my background is engineering, everything's about energy. And when I have meetings or when I do podcasts, when I do my speaking events, I always ask that question because if the audience is at a 4 or below, then that means they have a low energy level. They're not going to be present. They're not going to be engaged in the conversation. And it's best not to even move forward because it's a waste of both people's time. When people are 5 or better, and like you said, willing to grow, then that's where, to me, the possibilities are infinite of where the conversation can go and what the connections can actually yield. So thank you for allowing that question. Appreciate it.
Sure.
So without any further ado, why don't you introduce yourself as far as your background, your expertise to our listening audience?
Definitely. I just wanted to clarify one thing. You had said that I'm a CFO. I'm not a CFO per se, but I'll go through my background and I think everything will be very clear. So my name is Shmuel Gertel. I am an attorney a barred attorney in Maryland and in Washington, D.C. And I've been practicing in the state of Maryland for over 10 years. I also have been very involved in tax work. I worked at a very large accounting firm in Baltimore, Maryland called McLadry, which is a national firm. And I have a lot of experience in all kinds of transactional work, whether tax work, corporate work, real estate work. I worked in a very large law firm in the greater Baltimore area for over 5 years. And I decided to start out on my own as well. And what I was seeing with a lot of clients of mine who were looking for financing was that they were struggling to get the financing that they needed. And the fact that I had so many connections in the banking industry helped me to be able to connect clients of mine with the banking industry with those types of loans that were really tailor fit for them. And the loan that I felt was the most useful was the SBA loans because they really are aligned with small to mid-sized businesses. And I was able to parlay my experience with these clients, and that was how we actually wound up linking into each other. It was through a mutual connection, and I essentially have been helping many businesses with their SBA loan road to obtaining funding through the SBA loan, which is a wonderful tool, but a complicated process to get there.
Thank you. And just for clarity, I'm sorry if I gave the wrong impression. I was referring to the gentleman, Keith Steinkamp, that connected us with the CFO,
Gotcha.
not so much yourself. So
Okay, gotcha.
Made that misstep.
Okay.
I appreciate that. Now, I know within my network, I have a lot of small businesses that I work with, businesses that want to grow, and particularly capital or receiving capital is one of the barriers that prevents them from being able to grow successfully. So there's a lot of interest in learning more about the SBA program, particularly how to pretty much qualify for the SBA program and learning what other amounts, as far as loan amounts and terms and things of that nature, they can learn about the program as well. So that's one of the reasons why I'm definitely glad to have you on. So I have several questions I want to go through around the SBA program. If you can answer those for our listening audience, that'd be great.
Sure.
So we get started by first starting with, once all the documents are submitted, how long does it take before a loan is funded?
That is a great question. And again, every bank is different and every loan is different. But I think that really, I'm actually having this issue with a client of mine right now. I think that being conservative in these regards is the best. And I think that it should be assumed that it's not going to take less than 90 to 120 days. I've seen situations where things can take 60 to 90 days. I don't think it's ever going to take less than 60 days, but I think that it's probably error to assume that it's going to be longer rather than shorter. And I've been in situations where a business is purchasing another business and they really needed the funding, as soon as possible. And the SBA financing was actually holding up the deal, and the purchaser was really scrambling how to finance the project in the short term because the SBA funding had not yet been completed.
Now, just for our listeners who may have missed this, if you wouldn't mind kind of really explaining the difference between the 7A and the 504 loan.
Certainly, I think that's going to be the best place to start. Essentially, there are two types of SBA loans. There is another sub loan, but I don't really think it's not necessary to get involved in right now. Essentially, the two loans that exist are called a SBA 7A loan and an SBA 504 loan. An SBA 7A loan is the most versatile type of loan that the SBA provides. And the SBA 7A loan can be used for working capital, for business acquisition, for partner buyouts, for real estate purchasing, also in connection with these types of deals. However, the SBA 7A loan, I would call it the Swiss Army knife of loans, the type of loan that has the most versatility, that can be used for so many different avenues of use. That being said, an SBA 7A loan maxes out at $5 million flat. There's not really any way to go above that 5 million cap. By contrast, there is an SBA 504 loan. The SBA 504 loan is solely and exclusively for real estate acquisition. And when I talk about real estate, both for the 7A loan and for the 504 loan, I'm talking about owner-occupied real estate. So meaning in a situation, let's say you have a car mechanic that wants to, he's been renting a place to do his repairs, and he wants to buy a garage to start doing repairs. So the SBA has loan programs to assist in being able to purchase real estate for such a business. But SBA loans cannot be used for just speculative real estate. So meaning I can't use it to, if my business is to flip houses, I can't use SBA funding to buy properties and then flip them. That's not owner occupied real estate. It's only in a circumstance where I'm going to be living using that for business purposes for 51% of the space. Now that doesn't mean that I can't rent out the other 49%. So meaning if I have a 10,000 square foot warehouse, I could use 5,100 square feet and rent out the other 4,900 square feet. That is an opportunity that exists, but at the same time, but you still have to, use it for owner. It has to be owner occupied. So that's just a sidebar. So again, so there's a 7A loan. A 7A loan is used for working capital, for partner buyouts. It can be used for real estate, for the real estate piece of this. But the 504 loan is the loan that is solely and exclusively for real estate. And a 504 loan can go above that 5 million cap that a 7A loan has. So a 504 loan, the way that it would work is like this. The 504 loan really goes, as far as the SBA piece is concerned, it would be $5.5 million that would come from the SBA part of it. But there's an additional ability to go beyond, which is, it would be called a CDC, which is not the what's it called? The Centers of Disease Control. I forgot. I'm drawing a blank on what CDC stands for. It's some commercial development. I think it's commercial development corporation or something like that. So anyway, so it enables you, a small business, to be able to go beyond the 5.5 million of the SBA loan for 504, and it can really, a business can borrow up to, let's say, 15 million on a high end, if the business can justify such a loan. But in such a circumstance, you would have a situation of having potentially multiple lenders. You'd have it could be the same bank that's doing this SBA 504 loan and the CDC part of the loan, or potentially could also be two different banks, depending on situations. Ideally, I think it's easiest if it's the same bank, but potentially it can even be done through two different banks.
Okay, now that's a lot of information. That's a lot of great information. And definitely thank you for explaining that. Definitely want to drill down a little deeper. My first question would be, and you use the term owner occupied. And I know as a real estate investor, typically that's referring to residential property. So my question would be, would it be possible to use and you correct me if I'm wrong, a 504 loan to purchase such as a residential building that you use for a business? Like, for example, it's a 3-level property and 4 bedrooms. And you, as you say, you occupy for your office one of the bedrooms, but then you use the other 3 bedrooms for assisted living. Would that be something that you can actually get a loan for, use a 504 loan for?
Again, if the business, right, in theory, if I understand the specifics correctly, so again, so you have the assisted living facility, let's say on the first floor,
yes,
and then you have let's say apartments on the second floor, meaning you have like a mixed use kind of piece of property, and so the question is, can that be an owner occupied real estate type of? Let's say I'm the assisted living facility business, and I want to buy this property. I also want to rent out on the second floor for residential use. I believe that would be totally fine. Yeah, again, within the confines of it being 51%, 49%. And again, an advantage of, just to clarify what an SBA loan is and what is this SBA. The SBA is the Small Business Administration. The SBA was actually started under the Eisenhower administration to allow for small businesses to be able to have access to capital. It was started in the 50s. The SBA is not an actual lender of funds under SBA loans. The way that it works under an SBA loan is that it's the particular bank that's lending to the borrower that does the lending, but it's called an SBA loan because an SBA loan is backed up, is insured by the SBA up to a certain percentage. It can be up to 75% depending on the loan, and that is, it incentivizes banks to want to lend to people who may not otherwise fit into the general lending criteria of what a bank would normally be looking for in terms of who they'd be wanting to lend to. Now all of a sudden they say, okay, we're willing to lend because it's worth our time, and we know that we'll be backed up if something should go wrong. But at the same time, and I'm probably getting ahead of myself over here, something that also needs to be emphasized is that the bank doesn't like to have to go to the SBA when a loan fails. And to that extent, and to that end, a bank will need a personal guarantee on a 7A loan. If a bank will ever lend to a business on a 7A loan, they will need a personal guarantee. But on a 504 loan, again, an owner-occupied real estate 504 loan, there is no personal guarantee requirement at all.
That's great. So SBA, and just for my clarity sake, just using a reference point, it's similar to an FHA loan as far as how the banks use housing, where the government doesn't give the actual loan, but they insure the loan so the bank feels more comfortable with an FHA loan for first-time home buyers. It's similar structure in that context.
I think so. I'm not 100% sure of all the specifics of the FHA program, but because also is the FHA is, I don't think, is a separate branch of government. The SBA is its own actual sub branch of the federal government, and in fact they actually were very prominent during COVID because they had the special loans that were the economic what are they called? I forgot even the names of the loans, but those loans were actually being lent directly by the SBA. But these loans, what's normally done, what's called an SBA loan, is done through a traditional bank. And so that's also where I come in, is that not only can I help the business in terms of making sure that their documents are in order and making sure that whatever needs to be gotten and acquired and within the corporate realm as a tax and corporate attorney, they make sure that that their I's are dotted and their T's are crossed. But also I have the relationships with many banks to be able to know which banks would be right for a particular borrower to be able to obtain an SBA loan.
That's great. That's great information to know, because pointing folks in the right direction, particularly as it relates to which bank would be more amenable to this type of loan package, is definitely very helpful, very beneficial. So now both those loans sound great. As a consultant working with a lot of small businesses, I know that the need for capital is great, and this sounds like a great program. So before we get down into the qualifications of the type of what's required to receive these loans, I want to ask another question first. And that would be, is it possible to combine the loans? Because I know you said you can't use the 7A for real estate, but could you combine and receive both loans at the same time? Is that a possibility?
So the answer is technically yes, that both loans can be acquired at the same time. But again, this is a very bank-specific type of question of a bank's risk tolerance, willing to lend so much money. It really depends on the bank, and from my experience, it's usually best to start with one rather than to assume that I'm going to try and get both at the same time. But a lot of times, once a bank sees that you as the business are your business is humming. Let's say you're going for working capital loan on the 7A side, and you've shown 6 months of good track records on the 7A loan, they'll be ready to go on the 504 side as well. In theory, they could do both at the same time. There's nothing in the rules that prevent them from doing so. It's just, generally speaking, I don't think most banks are going to be willing to do that, especially in today's banking climate. But in theory, the answer is yes. In practical terms, the answer is probably I'd have to see it to I've yet to see that happen, but in theory, it can happen.
And see, that's one of the reasons why I highly recommend that folks talk to someone like you, who is a professional, who knows how these banks think and operate. Because as you said, as you can read the guidelines, you may qualify on paper, but you know that more than likely the banks won't look kindly upon lending that kind of capital to a business without having a strong proven track record, a lot of revenue coming in, and definitely a high credit score, which is a great segue into what are some of the criteria as far as qualifying criteria for these loans.
So that's a great question. So basically, let's say the back of the napkin type of answer is as follows. For sure, actually, I actually want to take a step back even before I answer your question, which is like this. A mistake that's made when people talk about SBA loans is that people think that the bank is lending to the business. In reality, when a bank is lending on an SBA loan, the bank is really focused on the person who's the people who are the key players, and they're really the focus of who the bank is looking at when it comes to a loan. And so to that extent, the bank wants to know what is so let's deal with the simplest kind of structure over here. I have a single member LLC. So a single member LLC, I'm the sole owner of this LLC. It doesn't matter how it's taxed, whether or not we check the box to tax it as an S corporation or a C corporation or whatnot. Bottom line is there's one owner. So let's say that, King, you are the owner of this LLC. We'll say it's X LLC, okay? And you're the owner of X LLC, which is a business that deals in, I don't know, name a business. I don't know.
Electronic communication.
Electronic communications. There you go. Nice. I like that. Okay. So King is the sole, we'll call him the managing member or the sole member, of X LLC, and that deals with electronic communications. So the bank is any bank is going to say, okay, we need to see your FICO scores. How are you a creditworthy individual? They're going to look at your tax returns for the last 3 years, your personal tax returns. They're going to look at your business tax returns of X LLC over the last 3 years. And they're going to really be focused in and seeing, well, how has this business been doing and how has King been doing? What are King's outstanding debts and what are the business's outstanding debts? Are there any debts that are owed to others? Are there mortgages? Are there promissory notes? All kinds of things like that. The bank is going to want to make sure that this business is a reliable business to lend to, is a creditworthy business to lend to, and that King is a creditworthy individual, because King is going to be signing a personal guarantee if he's going to be getting a 7A loan, to make sure that we know that we can get our money back when we lend to King and X LLC.
Excellent. And so what would you say is a qualifying FICO score minimum?
I would say the number, I've seen numbers put out as like 660, but like I think 680 is really your better range. If you're in 680 and above, you're doing okay, and you should have no problem being able to. I mean, again, assuming that you are creditworthy in terms of the business and individually, a 680 I would think would be the lowest threshold credit score to be able to get an SBA loan.
Okay, so just let me do a quick summary. So you say minimum a 680 credit score, 660, but you recommend 680 from your experience. 3 years of your bank statements. 3 years of your tax returns.
Tax returns, right.
What was the bank statements? Were there bank statements?
So banks, so meaning a lot of times, you're for the business. Let's say right now we're in August of 2023, right? So the tax returns for the business for X LLC only will go up to uh, uh, the end of 2022. But between December of 2022 and August of 2023, things could have happened. I mean, there's been a lot of changes, that could have taken place. So they're going to want to see uh, probably the bank statement from mid-year, which would be June of 2023, and also a profit and loss statement, a current profit and loss statement for the business
Okay. Now,
for fiscal year.
okay. So let me ask this question as well. Is there, based off that data they get from the 3-year tax returns, will that dictate how much of a loan you can get? So in other words, if a business only generates $200,000 a year, and this is their third year. The first year they generated 60, second year they generated 100,000. And I'm just throwing a case study out at you. And the third year they generated $200,000. Now, but they're looking for $1 million loan. Is that even feasible, or how would you recommend they would go about, and what kind of loan criteria should they focus on?
Right. So banks generally work on what's called a debt service coverage ratio, which is its acronym is DSCR. So, and it's a great question, by the way. So it's really the calculation of how to get to the debt service coverage ratio. I think is beyond the scope of this discussion. But bottom line is the bank will use what's called the debt service coverage ratio calculation, and usually what they are looking for is about a 1.25 DSCR in terms of what type of loan amount they'll give. So meaning you might say, well, I want $5 million, or I want, as you said, $1 million. But if if the calculations based on the DSCR will not justify $1 million, and instead would only justify $300,000, then the bank will say, take it or leave it. We're not going to over leverage ourselves and expose ourselves to potential losses just because you think that you want this money. There's got to be a valid. It's got to be valid in terms of where these numbers are coming from. When it comes to what's it called? When it comes to purchasing another business, there's also the calculation of, well, how much is this business generating? And so a lot of times banks will go based on 2 times the revenue of the business in terms of how much they're willing to lend to the buyer, because in terms of how much I say my business is worth $5 million, but really based on revenues, the business is only generating $2 million. So the bank will say, well, maybe we're only going to give $4 million. So that will, a lot of times the bank can also, depending on what the SBA loan is being used for, the bank can essentially knock down a seller price, because they'll say, well, very nice, you're asking for this much money, but you're never going to get it based on the revenues that are coming in, and therefore you need to lower your price, and be more in line with what is reasonable.
Great. And I just also want to get some clarity as well. So thank you for explaining that. And again, just using my experience analogy, I know that when you own property and you're looking for, if you own a multiple pieces of property, the banks are looking for, at least if you're looking for another loan, they want to see the mortgage plus another $300 maybe on top of that. So that kind of 1 and 1/2, what
Exactly.
you're talking about, is similar to
Cushion.
that cushion. Exactly.
Yes.
Now, one other thing too, before I move on from the qualifying criteria. So the banks are looking for 3 years, if you've been in business for 3 years, 3 years of your business tax returns, but they're also looking for your 3 years of your personal tax returns. So that's an and, or is it an or, would you say?
It's definitely, it would be at least 2 years of personal tax returns as an and. I think generally they also, and again, it depends on the bank. Different banks work differently, but I would say as a general rule, they're looking probably for 3 years. They want to make sure that things, especially also with COVID having been in the rearview mirror, they want to see how you were faring during COVID. Were you, I think that would be just a safe assumption. Assume that it's going to be 3 years of personal tax returns and 3 years of business tax returns.
And at least a 680 credit score. So that's great information.
Yeah.
Now I want to move on. So I know your time is limited. I want to get some other key questions answered before we go. How many businesses have your law firm helped receive SBA loan?
Right. Yeah. So that's always a question. I'm always a little hesitant to start talking about how many businesses my law firm has helped, because I'm afraid that people will get unfair expectations. There's like a rule of that past performance is not an indication of future success. So if I say, oh well, I've done 100 million of loans, people be like, okay, we're ready. So I think just to keep it as proprietary as possible, but be as open as possible. I've been successful in helping businesses. I've created strong relationships with banks, and I feel as though I'm also able to tell certain businesses, I just don't think this is going to go. And it sometimes is hard to tell a business that, like, I just don't think, give it another year maybe, or I just don't think that there's enough there to justify what's going on. Meaning I was dealing with a client, a business that was, a successful seller in Walmart. They were in Walmart, they're in Kroger's, they're in Target, they're doing 50 million in sales, but they're going through losses year after year. Their processes are not up to snuff, and so it was one of those things where I basically had to tell them that as it currently stands, I don't really think that a bank is going to be willing to provide SBA funding for working capital, despite the fact that on paper you guys have done a lot of good stuff, because unfortunately it the bank is going to focus on the fact that at the end of the day the tax returns are showing losses and not, and so that's not gonna help your cause. But bottom line is I feel like I've helped many businesses, and I will continue to do so, and I feel like I'm an honest analyzer of who can make it through the maze of the SBA financing process.
That's a good point you just mentioned there, because I think that a lot of people often overstate the value of how much revenue they generate, but understate how much losses they're having. So thank you for pointing that out. And I look at you in the context of being also like a mentor coach as well.
Exactly.
As opposed to just a consultant that's packaging a loan, but you can actually guide a person based on your experience. And to me, that's very valuable. And you can't normally get those from other consultants who may do a similar type of service. So I think that's key, that you bring the experience of understanding what banks to work with, as well as what the banks are looking for to help a business not waste their time applying for a loan that they may not get. So
right. Not wasting their time and not wasting my time.
Absolutely. So speaking of which, that's another segue into, is there a particular business industry that you specialize in or that you like to look for to work with?
I'd say like this, there are certain businesses that are probably the low-hanging fruit of SBA loans. Businesses that let's say a supermarket. Supermarkets are classic examples of businesses that are very easy to deal with when it comes to SBA funding, because they go through a lot of inventory and they constantly need working capital so that they can expand their supermarket essentially. So that would be like a classic industry, or let's say a lot of Amazon e-commerce is another thing because they're constantly going through inventory. That's another type of example. But I've dealt with things as far removed as vertical farming and ambulatory services. So like it's the type of thing where I wouldn't say that there's cookie cutter of, oh, it's got to be this industry and it's got to be this type of business, because I've seen many different industries, and I actually find one of the things I enjoy the most about working in what I do is that I get to see a lot of different businesses, things that I wouldn't even think would be a successful business, and I'm like, wow, this is really a great idea. This is so you get exposed to a lot of different types of businesses. And again, are there, let's say, cookie cutter businesses that are going to fit the lending criteria the most for an SBA loan? Yes, but that doesn't mean that I'm not open to other types of businesses, as I'm currently active with other businesses, and I will continue to be so.
Excellent. Now, does marketing promotions qualify under working capital under the SA 7A loan criteria?
That is an excellent question also. So I just wanted to break apart this question a little bit, because there are certain industries that will not be allowed to get an SBA loan. So there's certain types of what's it called? Avon. I forgot what it's called. It's called the mid-level marketing. That's what it's called. Mid-level marketing. I think that's the term for multi-level marketing. Thank you. Yes, I've got my language messed up. So multi-level marketing is not allowed for SBA loans. I think it's, to a certain extent, I think it's viewed as a Ponzi scheme by many people. So marketing for multi-level marketers would not be allowed for an SBA loan. But for any business that would but for businesses that do qualify as true SBA borrowers, let's say let's get back to your X LLC. So if you're involved in electric, what was the term that we used? It was electric
communication.
Electric communication. Thank you. So you want King's X LLC wants to expand onto Twitter. I don't know if it's called Twitter anymore, whatever it's called, onto Instagram, and and they want to so that would be absolutely allowed. That you could use the funding of SBA funds from 7A loan for marketing and advertising.
Okay, excellent. Now, what type of clients would you say you're looking for that we can make sure that we get this in front of the right target market?
Right. So as we've been speaking, so obviously, the classic industries of what we spoke about before, supermarkets and e-commerce people, e-commerce businesses, those are obviously the easiest to deal with. But really any business that has been that's been around for over 2 years, and that's been showing a level of profit for both of those years, and that fits the lending criteria for the person themselves also, as meaning that the person has a 680 FICO score, the person has tax returns, they've been filing the tax returns, which is also something that needs to be, a person sometimes can be derelict in filing their own tax returns. That's going to be a big red flag in terms of being able to obtain SBA funding for that business. But assuming that the person's, so basically the ideal business would be one that's been around for at least a couple of years, and that both the business has been filing the tax returns and the person has been filing their tax returns, and that they're both showing, especially the business is showing a profit, and that that it can continue to thereby be able to obtain the SBA funding and validate the loan from the SBA.
Okay. And then one last question, and this is more related to I believe the 504 loan. as it relates to real estate.
Okay.
Now, I know that when you apply for what's called an FHA 203K loan in real estate, is construction loan that you can apply for to purchase a property, and then FHA will give you actually the money for the acquisition and the construction, the renovation capital. But they don't make it out just to the borrower. They make it out to the borrower and the contractor. So you have to have the contractor selected to go on the application. That's how the checks are actually distributed. So my question would be, is it similar for a 504 loan? If you actually do the renovations, do you have to have a contractor already selected and with the checks to be dispersed to both you and the contractor for renovations to a property type of loan?
That's a good question. My understanding is that, well, first of all, are we talking about a renovation, or are we talking about a full, shovel, ground up construction?
Let's go with renovation.
Okay, fine. Because the way that I've experienced it, and that I've the way that I'm not, it only happened, I think, one time that I dealt with it, but the way that, if I recall, is that there's essentially like a work schedule from the contractor, and the bank will just release the proceeds to the contractor on the business's say so. It, like, what is the business's name on the check? I think it's, also, but essentially the money isn't going to the business. The money is essentially going to the contractor per the business's work schedule. And so essentially there's like three different parties. And the reason why I was asking you about if it's ground up construction is because, mind you, by the way, ground up construction is also allowed under an SBA loan, in theory, a 504 loan. So a lot of times what would happen with that is that there's an interim loan and then there's a final loan, right? There's the interim loan during the construction phase, and then there could potentially be a whole nother bank for the final loan. And again, it would really be working in the same kind of fashion, though, where you have this work schedule, scope of work, and and there's also certain amounts that are going to be held back. I think it's like 10% would be held back, depending on the bank, but I think it's usually about 10% is held back by the bank to make sure with reserves and all kinds of stuff like that. But as far as where the money's going, I think the way that it would go is that the money goes from the bank to the contractor, but it's only on the business's say so. When the business says, yes, the work has been done to our satisfaction, phase one is good, now contractor can start phase two and phase three, etc.
Okay. All right. Well, I do have one last question. I want you to share your contact information for folks to be able to get in contact with you. And that question would be, from your experience, do you recommend that a business, just as a rule of thumb, of course, just no one's going to hold you to this, but just as a general rule of thumb, would you say that a business should have at least 10%, 20% in the reserves of what they're seeking to borrow?
Yes, absolutely. The reason why is because banks are still going to be looking for some level of skin in the game, I guess, let's call it. Again, it really depends on if we're dealing with a 504 real estate loan or a 7A loan. Generally speaking, from what I've experienced, most 7A loans will require about 30% on the part of the borrower. So if a borrower wants, let's say, $1 million, so they're going to need to see $300,000 essentially from the borrower themselves that they're putting into, let's say, for working capital. So it's not just, oh, I'm getting working capital of $1 million. No, it's going to really, you're doing 1.3 million of working capital, of which $1 million is coming from the SBA. For 504 loans, the SBA is more lenient, and they can even allow as little as 10% down in order to facilitate a purchase of real estate. But again, it depends on the bank, and it's a type of thing that it's good to be ready to have reserves for whatever you're borrowing from the SBA. And in fact, I actually just dealt with a client now where they wanted to borrow $5 million for a 7A loan, but they realized that they're not going to be able to come up with the other, 20 to 30% from their own, equity raise. And so they're kind of pursuing other options because they don't necessarily know if the SBA loan route is going to make the most sense because of this needing to put down at least 20 to 30% on their own part.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for that answer. That definitely clears things up. So we've reached the end of the podcast questioning part. So as we conclude the podcast, I want to give you an opportunity to share any final thoughts you have, as well as your contact information, so our listening audience can get in contact with you and inquire about taking advantage of your services.
Okay. As far as my contact information, my email is Gertel Law, like my last name is Gertel Law at gmail.com. And my personal cell phone number is 516-376-4823. As far as just some further thoughts on SBA borrowing, I think I neglected to mention that, and I'm not sure how many people who are going to see this podcast are, let's say, a minority, but there are some people have this idea that if you're a woman or if you're a minority, then there's a special SBA program for specifically for minorities or specifically for women. There's really no such thing. There's only really two flavors of loans. There's a 7A loan and there's a 504 loan. However, within those two types of loans, there is the potential for, let's say, better interest rates depending on who the borrower is, and better terms depending on who the borrower is. So in theory, if you have a minority business owner or a majority woman-owned business, then potentially there can be certain, they could sweeten the deal, let's say, in terms of what the rate would be, what the terms would be. And also a couple of other things when it comes to SBA loans are that although an SBA 7A loan can be a 25-year loan, generally speaking, an SBA 7A loan is around a 10-year loan, whereas an SBA 504 loan, which again is for real estate, is normally the term is for about 25 years. That's the general rule. But again, as I was mentioning earlier, every business, every bank is different. So it really depends on who the lender is as far as what the terms are going to be. And the reason why what I also neglected to mention, and this is a very important point, is one of the reasons why to use an SBA loan as opposed to other commercial financing is because the rates are better on an SBA loan. Again, they're not great, especially now with interest rates having gone up so much, but they are better than any other loan product that's out there. And they're specifically were made that way so that small businesses can be able to tap into this funding and be able to get ahead in a way that they otherwise would not be able to do so.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for your information. You shared a lot with us. I definitely look forward to continue to grow our relationship and learn from you. And I definitely, on the King Connections, we're going to make sure we refer several businesses to you who are looking for the type of services you're providing. So again, I want to thank you for your investment of time and energy and joining us today on the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. It was really enjoyable.
And for the listening audience, whether you're listening to us live or you're listening to the recording of this show, we're going to actually also put the contact information of the law firm in the description of the show as well. And you can also reach them through us as well. So again, I want to thank everyone who's listened to the show, whether you're live. Ask questions as well. Definitely feel free to put your questions in the chats. We look forward to answering your questions and looking forward to everyone building and growing forward. So until our next show, everyone have a blessed and productive day. Thank you.
Thank you.